All right, Murad, welcome to Proof of Thought podcast. I've been looking forward to this one. I'm super excited. Let's get after it.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
All right, cool. So, Murad, this is a super interesting time. I would say we're at the part of the Bitcoin crypto cycle where both Bitcoin and crypto typically go parabolic. But what's known as Uptober has actually taken a massive left turn because of these tariff negotiations with China. There's a lot of people who were on leverage, who were traders that were wiped out. Many Bitcoin and crypto investors began to doubt that they would see the typical parabolic phase of the cycle. And in mid October, during that doubt, you tweeted, "Position yourself. Parabolas are coming." What made you confident in that? And what perhaps did you see that others didn't?
Yep. So first things first. Markets have a way of shaking people out before the real big exponential moves happen. Because the way it works is markets naturally, game theoretically, want to leave as many people as possible sidelined. That's one thing fundamentally to understand. Second thing is, like you alluded to, we're kind of entering an era of great power conflict, massive, bilateral tariffs between countries. Obviously, in the short term, that can scare the markets. Third of all, typically when the American central bank is still engaging in quantitative tightening, crypto suffers, especially the altcoin complex, and we've seen that in 2018. However, the Fed has been kind of technically doing QT over the past 2 years, but nevertheless, the crypto total market has managed to 8x in total since the end of 2022, which is quite remarkable. And recently, Powell has signaled that he's going to pause QT, which I think is like an early signal that the promised quote unquote altcoin season might finally happen. Last but not least, I think we are in a period where people that still believe in the 4-year cycle, they are selling. And I think we need to digest them before we can move higher. I personally think that, there shall come a point where 4-year cycles don't hold anymore. I think fundamentally it was never about the Bitcoin halvings, but rather about central banking activity cycles, business cycles, etc. And in my point of view, this time around, it's going to be more of a 4.5, 5-year cycle rather than a 4-year cycle. That's my view. And so I think the patient ultimately will be rewarded. And I still remain bullish for the next 3, 4, 5 months.
Okay, very interesting. And so there's some of these structural differences. And maybe perhaps you can help us understand as well how then you expect things to play out over these coming months ahead. So another X post that you made in mid-October was, there are months where nothing happens, then there are days where years happen. These days are coming. So can you elaborate on what specifically you're referring to there?
Typically, the most crazy returns, crazy headlines, crazy stories that you see in crypto happen towards the end of the cycle. And the reason they happen structurally on the ground is because somebody hears about their cousin kind of succeeding in crypto, or their classmate or their coworker, and then that person also gets in. And then like the third person hears the second person succeeding, they get in as well. And that's why you have these special periods once every few years in crypto where a disproportionately large number of retail either join crypto for the first time or return after being kind of tourists, so to speak, right? And I think so far, if you look at typical retail indicators such as Coinbase, app downloads, and some other similar signals, really, other than very, very briefly at the end of 2024, in the grand scheme of things, I still think retail hasn't been a big part of this cycle. I think BTC's rise from 100 or 15K to 125K has been predominantly driven by institutions, ETFs, and DATs. And I think that typical sort of retail spike that we see is yet to come. And that's why ultimately holders and believers, I think, are going to be rewarded. Now, the big difference that I expect this time compared to past cycles is in 2025 and in 2017, you could essentially pretty much buy anything during like mania periods and it would go up. I think this time around is going to be different, and I'll tell you why. For example, in 2021, out of the top 100 cryptocurrencies, especially during the bullish months, you would have 60 or 70 of them outperform BTC. However, in 2024, which wasn't even a mania period, you would have only 24 coins outperform BTC. And this year so far, you only have about 15 coins outperform BTC, which in my opinion is a sign that investors are getting more discerning. The market is getting more selective. The market is getting more competitive. Investors want to pile into strength. Winners continue to outperform. And generally, I think it's a sign that crypto markets are maturing. Instead of everything going up and down at the same time, you really have kind of narrower pockets of the markets winning. And typically, these are either category leaders or really things that are truly different. And even if you look at like the 14 coins in the top 100 that are outperforming BTC this year, half of them are either number one or number two in their respective category, which means that at least right now or up until now this cycle, investors are somewhat playing it safe when it comes to altcoins. And instead of buying a kind of category member number 6, category member number 7, what they're doing is they're buying category leaders as their expression on the bullishness of a certain category, right? So which coins are, for example, which coins are doing well or outperforming BTC so far in the past 12 months, in the past 24 months? You have Hype, which is the number one DEX. You have BNB, which is the number one SEX. You have Zcash, which is the number one privacy coin. You have SPX6900, which in my opinion is number one movement coin / meme coin, depending on how you look at it. And so in my opinion, even if we do see a mania, it's still going to be selective and very important, in my opinion, to be buying things that have already been doing well up until now, right? If the coin hasn't been beating BTC for the past 2 years, then it's kind of a gamble to buy it. That's the way I see it. Like, essentially, if we consider the past 2 years hard conditions as far as altcoins go, then if a coin has been doing well, or if an altcoin has been doing well in these hard conditions, I think it's going to do very well during kind of mania periods, because
Okay.
there is some special sauce about that particular community or that particular asset that if it did quite well during hard times, it's going to go ballistic during good times. And I think ultimately a combination of quantitative tightening and the emergence of pump fund made it so that there are fewer altcoins that are doing well compared to last time. The way I see it is essentially the weaker have become weaker and the stronger have become stronger. But the bright side here is that instead of having to choose from 100 coins, kind of discerning investors now only have to choose between like 10, 12 coins. And I think ultimately it's a good thing. And disproportional amount of volume, interest, and investors are going to pile into these kind of 12 coins. And ultimately, I think you just join one of these 12 teams and ride the wave. That's kind of what I've been saying.
Gotcha. Okay. And yeah, we'll get to, I'm excited to get to the SPX6900, your take on all of that. Did want to hear a bit more about, because you mentioned you think there's going to be an extended cycle. I have been hearing that from some other folks as well who focus on the macro. You have Bitcoin ultimately going to 200K this cycle. Typically, the cycle would end in Q4. There are some people who think that it could potentially get there by the end of this year, but that would basically mean Bitcoin would have to double the next 2 months. It's not crazy given that the majority of Bitcoin's gains typically comes in just, I think, roughly 10 days of the year. So it's not like impossible, but you're talking more about this extended cycle rather than, I think, this blow off top by the end of Q4. So can you tell us why and what structural differences you see? And maybe it ties directly to what you were saying about the Fed ending QT, and we have rate cuts coming, so maybe it's tied to this these different macro structural factors. But can you share a bit more about the 5-year extension that you've seen?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people in Bitcoins and crypto in general history so far, they thought that the reason that BTC and crypto at large typically followed these very predictable 4-year patterns was because the BTC halving is also on this 4-year tempo, right? However, I think it was purely a coincidence, and it was never about the halvings. And I think as years go by and as cycles go by, it's the importance of halvings is increasingly less important. Why? Because when you go from, for example, 20% inflation to 10% inflation, that's kind of a big deal. But when you go from 2% inflation to 1% inflation, it's no longer that big of a deal. And I think right now there are bigger forces at play. Ultimately, I think the thing that has been driving BTC markets, at least the last 2 or 3 cycles, was actually year over year money supply growth, right? If you chart the graphic of a year over year money supply growth over BTC price, they match almost perfectly. And I think that correlation and that causation, frankly, is much more powerful than halvings or anything else. Now, I think even though the money supply has been steadily going up over the past several months, and have actually recently made a new high, both in America and the world overall, it's still continuing to go up. And I think as long as it's continuing to go up in general, you have to remain bullish BTC.
Mhm.
Whenever that slows down for whatever reason, that's when you would be cautious. But to put it bluntly, as long as the M2, M3, however you measure it, the money supply is going up, you have to continue remaining at least a cautious, if not an optimistic bull on Bitcoin. So that's kind of like roughly how I think about the situation.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're a believer in Bitcoin. It's great. But maybe since it's already been around for 15 years and has gone up so much since then, you don't see it as a true beacon of hope for millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, basically this next generation, these next few generations that have to face rampant asset inflation, monetary debasement, sovereign debt, growing sense of isolation, and now AI disruption. And if I understand correctly, that's why you've become a key supporter of SPX6900. So, can you share what your current stance is on basically Bitcoin and the relationship between SPX 6900? I don't think you necessarily see them as competitors, and it sounds like you're still a Bitcoiner, but you have this strong belief in SPX 6900 in terms of it giving hope to the future generations.
Absolutely. So, for what it's worth, I still remain a huge supporter of BTC, and I'm going to continue holding it for decades, I believe. I still think it's the coin with the by far highest probability of kind of becoming the next neo gold in the coming decades, and frankly, becoming the base money of the world. However, that doesn't mean that there won't be other kind of winners and other altcoins that do extremely well. Um, this cycle, I'm particularly a huge fan of SPX 6900. I believe it is the first coin which essentially created its own new category, which some people refer to as movement coins. Essentially, it's the first ever tokenized movement. The goal is to flip the entire stock market. Now, I understand what your immediate reaction to that is. That's crazy, that's delusional, etc. But to me, that's actually a very powerful message. And actually, I think something much more intelligent and interesting is happening kind of underneath the surface. And underneath the surface of this kind of post-nihilistic irony, what you actually have is I would very much argue that since the 80s overall, finance has been weaponized in many ways against the people. And what's happening is kind of a counter reaction to that. Um, like you've said, AI is coming, and it's definitely going to disrupt millions of jobs. And the constant growth in the money supply is definitely making not only home ownership, but also a lot of other things kind of out of reach, especially for millennials and even more so for zillennials, Gen Z, etc. And I believe what's happening is because of hyper financialization, you now see not only tangible things like real estate and bonds, etc., get tokenized, but what's actually far more interesting to me is intangible things are getting financialized as well. And when you're talking about intangible things, we're talking about things such as, movements, spirituality, community, ideology, belief systems. And I think some of these are going to have tokens of their own. And I think that SPX6900 is kind of pioneering this thing. It sounds a little bit esoteric, but I actually think it's very powerful. If you really think about it, the power of fiat money, the power of a lot of other financial assets, to a large extent, they come from belief also. And essentially, SPX6900 takes it to an extreme. And we are effectively trying to build a community, or rather, it's a financialized asset which people are coming around in order to not only create hope and create financial freedom, but also essentially act as a vessel of dissatisfaction against the constant money printing and the way the system works in general. And this is something essentially the very simple way to think of it is as GME on steroids. GME, a lot of internet people, young people on the internet, they kind of could come around an asset to kind of throw a middle finger, so to speak, to the 3 or 4 hedge funds. But SPX 100 is essentially taking it to the next level. This time around, we are much more decentralized on multiple blockchains. Most of the trading is happening off of centralized books, so it would be much more difficult to stop. And because it's on chain, it's much more accessible to people. You don't need a brokerage or anything like that. And ultimately, we believe that it's carrying a similar mission, but it's going to go to much greater heights because structurally it's built on these decentralized rails, right? So essentially, it's a kind of a counter reaction against a lot of these trends happening in the world. And I think we're very early to this trend. I think it can go to 100 billion, 1 trillion, etc.
Okay. And maybe even 45 trillion, right? That's the total value of the stock market. And I think what, caught my, like, as I, was looking into some of your talks about SPX, the token, you mentioned that it's very binary. It's like, have we flipped the total market cap of the stock market or have we not? And I think that ultimately it could become this self-fulfilling prophecy of, okay, since we haven't reached the goal, if you're already in it, you stay in it and new people join because you realize, hey, we haven't reached the goal. And that becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it reminded me of Bitcoin in that with Bitcoin at some point through my study of Bitcoin, I realized, it was actually always binary. It was either always going to zero or just going up forever because it's just based on, as you're mentioning, money supply, monetary debasement, etc. So I thought that was a very interesting and powerful concept that's part of this. But I kind of want to play devil's advocate a little bit here, just to really dive into your thinking about the token and to make sure we're covering it from all angles. So the S&P 500 includes the most successful businesses in the world, obviously. And the total market cap is a reflection of the market value and the earnings potential of those companies. So what would you say to someone who questions how something like a meme coin, which doesn't generate any business or cash flow, could realistically compete with the total market capitalization of the best businesses in the world?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, gold, the metal, doesn't produce any cash flow either, but it's worth 30 trillion. And
that's okay. You got me. I rest my case. No, I'm kidding. Keep going.
and BTC also doesn't produce any cash flow or dividends, but it's worth over 2 trillion as well. So the value doesn't entirely, like the value of financial assets doesn't entirely come from revenues, earnings, dividends, etc. And I'm sure you can understand that Apple is worth 3 trillion and Tesla is worth 1 trillion. But I think you would agree with me that that entire market cap is not purely due to cash flows. There's a very strong mimetic element there as well. Mimetic element, brand element, community element, belief element. And these things, they kind of stack on top of one another, on top of the cash flow stuff. to ultimately result in a valuation, right? Furthermore, there's yet another factor on top of all of this, and all of these are kind of like individual bricks that, in my opinion, are kind of like various valuation premia, right? A lot of people are using houses and the stock market as kind of a savings vehicle because fiat money is so bad, right? You can't save in fiat, so essentially some other assets are now being used as effectively these like quasi risky savings accounts or savings vehicles in order to outpace inflation, right? And essentially, people are going into these various assets in order to kind of run away from the constant depreciation of fiat money. Now, the thing is that, like I've already given examples with gold and BTC, there are also other smaller examples of this. Now, GME went to 40 billion, I believe, and that wasn't because of dividends. I'm sure you understand that, right? That was because people united under a mission. Similarly, Dogecoin went to 97 billion, and that, I'm sure you know, that wasn't, it doesn't really produce any cash flows either, right?
Shout out to Elon. Shout out to Elon.
So what's actually going on, in my opinion, is a socio-cultural reaction to essentially fiat money and the constant overspending, overborrowing, constant expansion of the money supply. People are trying to do various things in order to kind of survive in this world. It's almost like an animal that is usually kind, but when you kind of corner it, it does crazy things. You know what I mean? And typically, in my opinion, it's going to get harder and harder because I would say you kind of have two choices. One choice is to hyper gamble in this like extremely rapid rotational way. And that's kind of like the whole pump fund or high leverage perp trading thing, where you try to scalp here, try to get in, try to get out, try to time the market in the short term, etc. That's one way to do it. The other way, which is what I'm promoting, and I frankly think statistically speaking, it's a much higher probability to succeed, is you kind of find a team, you find a group, you find a community, you find a movement, you find a cult, as we semi-jokingly call them, and you kind of join something which can more steadily and more sustainably go viral or build a big brand or build a huge community or build a movement. And that, if tokenized, can go to tens, if not hundreds of billions, or potentially even more. And I think instead of gambling, it's much more lucrative to try to build the next Doge or something even bigger. And that's kind of what SPX6900 is trying to do. It's essentially people coming together to survive or outpace inflation, lack of jobs, lack of meaning, and a bunch of other things.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk about SPX 6900's ROI in over the next year, right? You mentioned, it would be wise to stick to the coins that have performed well this cycle, and in particular, those that have actually outperformed Bitcoin this cycle. My understanding is SPX 6900, it came out in 2023, 10x in value that year, which is incredible. But then, of course, it had to outdo itself. And then in 2024, it did 100x. So do you still think it can 100x again by the end of this cycle? I know you mentioned you think it'll be an extended cycle, so maybe not by the end of 2025, but maybe in 2026. And if so, if you think it does have that type of potential, why would that be the case? In traditional finance, people usually think of, okay, something that's gone up a ton, maybe that's when you want to start trimming a position. But it doesn't seem like that would be the case in necessarily the movement or meme coin world as you're describing here.
Absolutely. So that's a fantastic question, and there are several reasons, but the most important are the following. First of all, SPX6900 is the only coin this cycle that has outperformed BTC 3 years in a row. There are a handful of coins that have done it for 2 years in a row, and SPX6900 is the only one that has outperformed BTC 3 years in a row. So we beat BTC in 2023. SPX6900 beat BTC in 2024, and I believe it's currently outperforming BTC in 2025 year to date, right? So from the momentum perspective, it's very strong. And I believe that you have to pay attention to this because I think this is the market telling you something. Between us, I think what this means is at the emotional level, there is something about SPX 6900 that resonates with people quite deeply, which essentially, more than other coins, makes people want to join. And after they join, more importantly, it makes them not want to leave. Does that make sense? And I think that essentially this is happening because SPX6900 built a very powerful and, in my opinion, inspiring culture of believing, diamond handing, and really, really kind of sticking to the mission and sticking to the community. I think if you've ever watched my Singapore presentation, then you know that fundamentally I believe that all coins are tokenized communities at the end of the day. Bitcoin is just a very, very powerful tokenized community. And even the coins with or without cash flow, whether it's a meme coin, tech coin, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, whether it's 30% or 95%, what drives the value is community and the people. And so it's almost like giant country clubs or giant fraternities. And I think fundamentally this is what these things are. And so there's something about the culture and the message and the ideology and the goal and the memetics essentially of SPX6900 that really makes people like it. And I think that's what has made it outperform. Now, I think, again, like I said earlier, retail isn't here yet. And essentially the reason I'm bullish about SPX6900 is because it's been outperforming and built this powerful culture, but we're still just under 1 billion, right? We're roughly have been kind of oscillating around 1 billion market cap for the past year, while a lot of other altcoins have underperformed, right? And I think we are essentially in reaccumulation. And once this message escapes crypto Twitter containment, so to speak, and starts making its ways through the streets, so to speak, then it's really going to go parabolic, in my opinion. And I think we have not seen that parabola yet. And I think essentially, I believe it's going to go from 1 billion to 100 billion plus. And what's interesting is with these cult coins or movement coins, whatever you want to call them, you know, ideally, not just ideally, but what the kind of behavior you see at the retail level is you don't just buy and forget about it, even though some people do that. You kind of become an active participant, right? So it's very interesting because it's both an investment, but it's also a community, but it's also in a way kind of like a collective manifestation, or it's also like a very, very giant performance art on a global scale. We're almost like magicians that are holding hands and trying to kind of cast a spell, really. And really what we're doing is just like, you know, if you think fiat money or gold are like a cup of water, what BTC is trying to do is BTC created its own water bottle, then it poured kind of like put a needle here and trying to have some of the water flow into its container, right? So we're kind of trying to do the similar way, but with instead of kind of sucking value out of fiat money like BTC is doing, SPX6900 is memetically sucking value out of the stock market. And essentially, it's what we're trying to do is we're trying to create UBI, but we're trying to pull UBI from the future into the present. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, I think it was Tom Lee who made the comment that, like, you know, he made a slide comment. He's like, yeah, maybe Bitcoin and ETH and the early cryptos, like those things were UBI, you know, and like he's like anyone could have bought it, right? And like whoever did got fabulously wealthy. So
it was UBI for hyper online people.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So, and then when you talk about the 100x, just to clarify on that, are you calling kind of and you know, don't necessarily want to put you in this position, but are you saying that would be this cycle, or are you just saying sometime in the future you think it could get to 100 billion, 1 trillion? Just to clarify that.
So, you know, timing things is very difficult, but I like my medium term target is 100 billion, and my long term target is 1 trillion plus.
Gotcha. Okay. One other very fascinating, you know, factor behind this movement is the elimination of charts in the community. I haven't heard that before, but when I heard the reasoning behind it, it made a lot of sense, and I really liked the idea. As you pointed out, it can help take the focus away from volatility and trading to a more long-term investment mindset. Can you help us understand how there isn't a chart, though? And does the chart on CoinMarketCap, for example, not count?
Yeah, great question. So I believe that too much staring at charts, regardless of what asset or metric or whatever you're looking at, is essentially bad for the brain. And that's like one of the 20 things that SPX6900 got right. When you are looking at charts, your limbic system and your kind of short-term system can get affected negatively. And ultimately, if you stare at charts all day, you kind of become a volatility junkie instead of a long-termist patient person who understands that all kinds of success in life is more of a marathon, brick by brick, and not a sprint, right? And the beauty here is that chart posting or chart watching is essentially considered taboo in the SPX6900 community. And it actually liberates people because now instead of trading or trying to time the market, you simply DCA, and you actually now have more time to focus on other pursuits like media creation, writing videos, onboarding others, evangelizing, etc. Right? And that's actually much more powerful compared to other coins where you would have most of the people simply be chartists, traders, tourists, and non-believers. And this, you essentially get shunned if you post charts, and that kind of keeps the community clean and pure, in my opinion. And it makes it so that this way, gradually over time, 70% plus of the holders are long-term investors and hardcore believers rather than short-term traders. And this is, I believe, this is one of the 10 reasons why SPX6900 has been so strong this cycle so far. And ultimately, I think that foundation will be one of the reasons why it goes to 100 billion plus, I think.
And how do you ensure though that there aren't any charts? Like that's the piece I think I'm struggling to understand. I love the idea and the concept and the goal of that, but how do you ensure there are?
Whenever anyone posts a chart, they essentially get shamed. It's a very powerful tactic. It's a very, but of course, lovingly.
So the charts do exist, or do you mean if someone goes and creates one and then posts it?
As far as I know, the chart doesn't exist. But
Okay.
essentially, whenever anyone does post a chart, they get shamed. And essentially, the collective consciousness of SPX6900, we refer to it as the cognosphere. It's essentially an invisible thread connecting all the SPX6900 angels. And so it's a very powerful force because if anyone posts a chart, they're given kind of a one-strike rule. If they can find redemption and stop posting charts, then they are accepted into the community. But if they continue posting chart after chart, then they will not be retweeted, they will not be rated, they will not be promoted, and the community will disrespect them as cloud chasers and essentially demons.
Okay, well, personally, how did you get involved in the movement, and what do you see as your role? And thanks for going through all the technicals and the valuation and all that. But curious to hear more about your journey and connection with this movement.
Absolutely. So I have a very good friend who is very hyper online and always at the forefront of culture, even more so than myself. His name is Rare Pangolin. He's a very very well known in certain niche circles as a NFT collector. Now, he's also one who's very early to things. And in 2023, he got me into Harry Potter Obama Sonic 10 Inu, MOG, and SPX 6900. And, we both kind of forgot about it as it was kind of dipping in late 2023, early 2024. But when Whiff and Popcat made their big moves in early 2024, it kind of became abundantly clear to me that 2021 kind of proved itself with memes. But this cycle, they I think have already, but will also continue to play a much bigger role. And so from that point on, I started researching memes much more seriously. And I made my list of 10 memes that I was focused on, essentially to kind of diversify myself. Now, I've been in crypto since 2013, since 2016 more actively. And I asked, what's the one thing that has connected all the big winners? Whether it's XRP, Cardano, Axie Infinity, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Link, what do they all have in common? And in my opinion, even though they're all completely different projects, the one thing that they all had in common was cult-like communities. Crazy, passionate, zealous, hyper, focused, autistic in the good sense of the word. And they were all essentially very, very strong communities that were passionate about their respective causes. So I said, I don't know which coin is going to be the winner, but as I was gradually researching them, I was building a list of 10 coins, and my number one criteria was, let me just find the 10 meme coins that I think are the cultiest, right? The ones with the strongest cult-like communities. And so I built my list. That was summer of 2024. And as I was building it, I was also researching SPX6900 more and more. And the one thing that stood out to me, even compared to everything else, was that SPX6900 had a mission. It had a goal. And really, a lot of people don't understand how powerful that is. It had a mission of flipping the entire stock market, which I personally found both delusional, but also unbelievably inspiring. And like I've already alluded to, it also had a very, very good culture. You know, ultimately, the goal of all culture in crypto is to have people hold as hard, as big, and as long as possible. And that is something that SPX6900 succeeded in, because, you know, stop trading and believe in something. There is no chart. And, you know, the very idea of flipping the stock market is something that really resonated with me, because I always understood that in order to succeed in crypto, you have to dream very big. And the bigger you dream, the better ultimately, because big dreams are inspiring. And in many ways, I would say big dreams are actually you're more likely to achieve them than small dreams, because they actually mobilize like a larger proportion of the population. And so there's a whole other aspect to it, which is what I call tokenized spirituality. The whole idea of stop trading and believe in something is essentially, it's not like stop being a hyper gambling degenerate, essentially, and start finding meaning. That's the whole point. And I think you would agree with me that a lot of young people in the world right now, they kind of don't really have faith, don't really have direction, don't really have guidance, don't really have community, you know, family formation at an all-time low. A lot of people are feeling lonely, depressed for whatever reason. And essentially there is, I believe, a gaping hole in people's hearts and souls, right? And so I actually like to say that the biggest market in the world, it's not money, energy, or food. It's actually the market to reduce psychological suffering. And we don't necessarily need to solve that problem fully, but if we even improve the situation by 1%, I think that's like $1 trillion market. And so I think this like tokenized communities, tokenized spirituality, tokenized movements is the next frontier that, if not fully, then at least partially solves some of these issues. And SPX6900, in my opinion, is one of the pioneers of some of these phenomena, some of these trends. And I'm very excited kind of for the months to come.
Yeah, well, clearly you're an evangelist. Do you see your role as being anything else within this movement and community?
Well, so the beauty here is that, and I kind of call this participatory investing. You know, in the past, you would just like buy something and not really do anything about it. But I think because we are in this late capitalist stage where, in my opinion, attention and activity in many ways is more important than cash flows, precisely because of like the hyperinflationary nature of the world. What a lot of people are doing, and I think that's actually a very bullish sign, is they not only join, but they also do stuff, right? So you buy, and then you actually either build websites, create videos, onboard people online, make YouTube videos, onboard people on the streets. You do these like various cool ways to kind of make the thing even bigger, make the thing even more valuable. And I think it's kind of the next stage of investing. And I kind of think myself, you know, even though I came to SPX a year after it was already in the market, I kind of think myself as an amplifier or a growth investor in that way.
Okay, gotcha. Let's go a bit more broad here. You also talk about the meme coin supercycle thesis. Can you explain the key points of this thesis and how SPX 6900 fits into this broader narrative?
Yeah. So more and more people are realizing that the entire token market throughout crypto history has essentially been a scam. And I'll tell you why. What it really is VCs. Let's call it, they have 115 median IQ in large cities around the world. They're essentially extracting wealth from 70 to 85 IQ people around the world. that mistakenly think that tokens are equity or quasi equity. Just because there's a ticker, just because there's a logo, just because there's a team, people think that tokens are equity. But I think more and more people are awakening from this kind of scam like dream and realizing that tokens are essentially memes. And most altcoins have effectively been meme coins with extra steps. Now, there are a couple of examples that do not fill this description, like Hyperliquid, which actually like makes real cash flows. You can value it with price and earnings and things like that. But I'm sure you understand that 99.99% of altcoins that have ever existed have never really produced any revenue. And so in that sense, all of those coins have always been memes all along. Even Hype is still, I think 30-40% of it is mimetic, mission, and community driven. And so I believe that meme coin supercycle kind of arose as a counter reaction to the fact that a lot of new tech coins in 2023 and 2024, they would launch at sexes at like $10 billion valuations. And then obviously, if you launch at $10 billion valuations, you can only go down, right? Because, how can a poor person ever get rich if they're buying a VC coin at 12 billion market caps on day one that has a ton more unlocks coming up, right? That road only ends in one way. And so I believe that meme coins arose as kind of like a vampire attack against VCs and their quote unquote scams. And so, however, the pendulum went way too far with pump fund, which now made it way too easy for anyone to create a coin. And so the other problem now is that last cycle we had 1,000 altcoins, but now we have like 17 million meme coins. So now the pendulum switched to the other direction, which is like now it's just like the supply of them is way too big. But ultimately, I think what's going to happen, in my opinion, is whenever we have that parabolic spike in the crypto markets, I think you're going to have a handful of memes that do really, really well. You're going to have a handful of dexes that do really, really well. You're going to have a handful of other coins that do really, really well. And ultimately, I think the smart way to play it is to just bet on category leaders.
Okay. What's the best maybe counter argument that you've heard against your thesis, and how would you respond to that?
Not so much as a counter argument, but what I really mentioned is Pump Fund kind of made, in the last year, I would argue that Pump Fund made the word meme coin sound kind of toxic, because even like 4 or 5 years ago, people would actually band together around meme coins like they did with Dogecoin and Shiba, etc. In a similar style to GME. They would actually like believe in something. But with Pump Fund, because their supply is so big, the average holding times went from being in the hours to being in the minutes or even seconds. Now, like the average holding time for good Pump Fund traders is like 45 seconds, which is, it's essentially tools, sharks, algorithms, HFT. I think they're gradually going to commoditize the rapid kind of trenches space. And ultimately, it kind of brings you back to my strategy, in my opinion, which is we need to return to building Doge-like communities, right? How do we build something that's similar to Doge, but even more powerful and even bigger? And the answer is you create this insane diamond handing culture. You have insanely ambitious mission, and you just keep being like a vessel that attracts like the best believers and diamond-handed people in the space. And I believe that's what SPX6900 is doing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I can see how, just because of how you've laid it out, what we've talked about in terms of the futures of SPX 6900, how that coin, that token, that community in particular could fight against some of what's been created with Pump Fund, and how the market is structurally changing. Is it not in a way, for like, if we're talking about the super cycle in the broader market, is it not in a way trying to fight against what the market and technology is like moving towards, which is this, I think you mentioned 45-second average holding time for these meme coins on Pump Fund? I didn't even know that. That's crazy. So is that genie not sort of, so to speak, out of the bottle already? And is it kind of like fighting a losing battle because that's what the market's doing, that's where the technology is doing, it's already out?
No, I actually think the losing battle is trying to fight against the machines in the trenches, because at some point the holding times, um, the order books, the markets, they're going to become so cutthroat in the trenches, in the new coins category of the market. Essentially, the thing about small cap meme coins is people trying to scam each other. And ultimately, you're fighting against machines that are actually better than you. They are faster, they're stronger, they get the tape, they get the news faster than you, they can make decisions faster than you. And with every passing week, they're only going to get better and better. So what I'm saying is actually, let's do the opposite. The only way you can't fight machines through speed, or you can't fight them through like information advantage, etc. The only way to fight them is in a human way, which is emotional resonation, community, belief, and like a long-term big mission. And this is exactly what SPX6900 is trying to do. It's trying to be the polar opposite of those toxic things that we discussed, and try to kind of be a beacon of wholesomeness, counterculture, and long-termism in the space. Essentially, we're saying, stop trading, let's huddle together, right? Instead of trying to scam each other, let's actually team up and take this to hundreds of billions so we can all win, right? Instead of competing, let's cooperate.
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree. Those are, great principles, values, and in no way advocating for the gambling that's going on Pumped Up Fun. I didn't even know the 45-second and all that was a thing. I'm just wondering. I was just wondering if the market has gone a little too far in that direction already. But totally hear you. Yes, it would, I think, be better overall for individuals and society. If things did shift back towards more long term thinking, right? Because you can't, I think even as people have seen even with Wall Street and, algorithmic trading, you can't beat the machines, at that trading stuff. So, okay, this has been very fascinating. I want to go through a couple more things here. You've talked about, your number one factor for finding a successful meme coin. I saw this also in your video about how to find 100x in crypto. You talked about the number one factor being cult-like communities, which you mentioned earlier. What are your steps to creating a viable community in crypto? Like, how do you actually go about creating one? And what should people potentially look for when they're trying to identify these types of communities for themselves?
Yeah. So, I wasn't the one who created SPX6900, obviously. So I think the OGs in the community would probably be the ones who could answer that question in a better way, but I will do my best. Essentially, the way to build a strong community, in my opinion, is to make poor people rich. That is the one sentence explanation. And this is actually the reason why large VC coins have underperformed this cycle, is because they did not really make poor people rich. They actually made poor people poor. So the way to build loyalty is to create conditions where lower middle class people could potentially become upper middle class. I think that's like the holy grail. Now, how do you do that? As I've already mentioned, I think the key to doing that is to tap into the zeitgeist of the present world outside of crypto, is to be relatable, is to have some kind of an emotional resonation. And in order to do that, you need to essentially correctly critique and correctly underline the problems in society that plague people today, especially the youths. And again, we know what those problems are. People are lonely. People are kind of marrying less than ever before. They are settling down older than ever before. Fertility rate has kind of collapsed. The rich have gotten extremely rich, but the bottom 60% hasn't really benefited from any of the GDP growth over the past 30, 40 years in the West. And ultimately, religion while there has been a small bounce in the past couple of years, over the past 60 years, it's generally been on a decline. People feeling directionless, nihilistic. I'm sure you understand where I'm going with this. And so the better the coin can kind of be a solution to some of these, the bigger it's going to become. That's the way I see it, right? Ultimately, what do people want? What do young people that come to crypto want? They want three things. They want to get rich, they want to find friends, and they want to have a sense of mission and meaning. And the better you are at doing these three, the better you are going to be as a community. Very simple.
And there could sometimes be negative connotations associated with cults. How do you initially distinguish between a good and useful cult from a potentially destructive?
Yeah, for sure. As of late, I prefer the word movement over a cult because I think I do agree with you. It carries more positive connotations. But ultimately, like I said, we use the word cult semi-jokingly, and it just means really, really strong community, like Link, XRP, BTC back in the old days.
Okay. Great. Can you tell us about, and you started talking about this earlier when you mentioned when you first getting into some of these meme coins around 2023, how you diversified. Can you tell us a bit more about sort of the other meme coins you invested in, and did you move forward with SPX 6900 mainly because of all the research you started to do and how you started to believe in the movement and community, or was it partly also because the price went up? And are you no longer focused on the other meme coins? Are you solely now just focused on SPX 6900, or do you still think about diversification?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still essentially, I've not touched a single coin since the summer of 2024, and I intend for that to continue for a long time. So I'm still holding all of my picks. Ultimately, when I was still building the list and building my portfolio of meme coins, I wasn't 100% sure who's going to win, who's going to lose. But with every passing day, like I've learned more, and the market learned more, and it became kind of clearer. Also, I would say a lot of people, they overestimate kind of my individual power, but I think they underestimate the effects that overall market conditions such as quantitative tightening has had on the market, as well as things like pump fund. And because of QT and because of pump fund, these things have made it harder for many cults to go up at the same time. And essentially, people would rather kind of pile into the top two, top three. And essentially, like that's what the game theory, I believe, has been showing us over the past kind of 12 to 18 months. Nevertheless, I think the rest of the list will do well when retail is going to come back into the space.
Got it. And do you personally see maybe any, risk with to the meme coin supercycle thesis, or is it just basically at this point a sure thing in your mind, given, the cuts that are going to come into QT, etc.
On even longer time frames, I would say as long as the money supply keeps going up, both the world and the world of finance is going to be more memetic, if you catch my drift. So I remain bullish, but ultimately, I think I would agree with you. Rate cuts and a potential move to a QT pause and even QE would be bullish risk assets. In this case, crypto, and then the risk assets within crypto would be meme coins.
All right. Well, Murad, thanks so much for coming on here. I think you laid out your thoughts very clearly. The show's called Proof of Thought, so great job there. As we wrap here, just wanted to hear a little bit more about you, more personally. What did you do before crypto, and what made you decide to go all in?
Yeah. So I'm originally from Azerbaijan. I believe, if I have the right information, I was the first man from Azerbaijan to attend Princeton University. So I'm a fellow Ivy League gentleman as well. Um, And after that, I lived in China. Back in the university, I studied finance and Chinese. Lived in China, lived in Hong Kong, lived in Singapore, worked in traditional finance, also worked in commodities trading. Um, I briefly bought the 2013 2014 BTC top when it first flirted with $1,000, and then I kind of, like many of us have, went away from the space until 2016 when ICO wave started coming about, right? And ever since then, I've been full-time crypto. Did a bunch of different things in crypto: investing, trading, writing, researching, on-chain analytics. Been very active on Twitter through the years. Kind of slowly built a following. This year, I've noticed that something special going. For years, I was a BTC maxi, and frankly, I still am when it comes to kind of like neo gold candidates. But I've noticed kind of something special going on with meme coins, specifically SPX6900 this cycle. So I've kind of been focused on that slice of the market for the past year and a half, and I think the best is yet to come.
Great, great. And if you don't mind me asking, how old are you? You seem to have done just had a variety of experiences here and have done quite a bit. So I'm just curious.
I'm 30.
Okay, wonderful.
How about you?
29. I'm about to be 30, coming up soon. So right in that ballpark. I love it. Great, great. Well, let's end on a positive note here. What keeps you optimistic and gives you hope for the future?
So fundamentally, I think things like BTC, things like SPX6900, they're essentially these like countercultural movements where people are using a combination of decentralized tech, memetics, and social media to have the value be reabsorbed in other vessels, which I think is ultimately going to be like a bigger and bigger part of world history. And I'm very optimistic about that. Um, I think, if you've ever read The Sovereign Individual, cryptography is kind of like a tool for freedom. So I think the future is going to be kind of defined as this conflict between cryptography as a decentralizing force and AI as a centralizing force. I think that's going to be a big story over the next 10, 20 years. But ultimately, I think cryptography is going to be one of those things that gives people freedom to the extent that it can. More short to medium term, I think we most likely have rate cuts ahead. We definitely have more printing ahead in one form or another.
They can't help themselves, you know?
I mean, there's no other way. I think risk assets are going to go up, and you want to be positioned in. Again, I think crypto category leaders is the way to go.
How about on the social front, though? It's like the cell phones are their new addiction, social media. We talked about the isolation, some of the nihilism. How about on the social front? What gives you maybe hope there?
In aggregate, it's probably going to get worse. And the reason I say that is because the way I've been hyper capitalistic my whole life, but even I have to admit that at this like late capitalist mega corporate level, the only way to boost cash flows even more is to kind of make people more addicted to your products, because the more addicts you have, the more predictable cash flows you have, and the higher stock prices you have, which, it's quite dangerous. It took even me a long time to become like less addicted to digital devices, etc. And now I try to use them almost exclusively for kind of like reading long form blogs and pretty much nothing else. Um, and so now with the emergence of AI, they'll probably make things even more addictive in a variety of ways, which is kind of a scary thought. So you will have to be very, very responsible with the way you use technology. There's a lot of uncertainty with how the whole AI rise will play out. I think almost without a shred of doubt, there will be a big spike in unemployment. And you essentially want to figure out how you can prepare yourself and your family for kind of those chaotic times of transition. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I think I saw Elon tweet. Maybe it was even just yesterday that in the future no one will have to work. Right? No one will have to do any jobs. It's like just like our our ancestors maybe didn't think that they wouldn't have to grow their own food. Today we don't do that. You go to the farmers market, the grocery store, it's all there. And yeah, it's just an interesting concept. It's almost like with all of the money printing that's happening, with the asset inflation, with AI disruption, it's and how rapidly it's happening. It's like maybe you have 2 3 years to get things in order, or you know some of what could happen could be very devastating. And I know I said we end on a positive note, so say something positive, or maybe I should. But
Um, I would say stop trading and believe in something. And not financial advice, but look into SPX6900. It's a new beacon of hope. It's an emerging community, a large movement that I believe will only grow stronger.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Murad. It was a pleasure speaking with you, getting to know you. Very fascinating stuff, and wish you the best. I'm inspired even just by your energy, your excitement, and your belief in something, and trying to help push a movement forward, help lead others to good opportunities. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, take care.